Hey guys, tonight we begin with the demanding, unforgiving, and philosophically brutal world of ancient Athens. A place of endless questioning, mathematical obsession, and intellectual gladiatorial combat. We're diving into what life was really like at Plato's Academe. Forget the romanticized visions of wise men in togas having friendly debates under olive trees that your college professor sold you. The truth. You probably wouldn't last a single day. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Congratulations, you've just woken up in Athens, 387 BCE. The good news? You've been accepted into the most prestigious intellectual institution of the ancient world, Plato's Academe. The bad news? Everything else. Your day begins before dawn in a sparse dormitory shared with several other students. There's no comfortable mattress, no privacy curtains, and definitely no snooze button. Your bed is a simple wooden frame with a thin straw-filled sack that crackles like autumn leaves with every slight movement. The smell is a unique blend of olive oil, sweat, and the distinct aroma of scrolls made from animal skins. Your fellow students are already stirring, some mumbling geometric theorems in their sleep, others silently reciting Plato's latest lecture like it's a prayer. You're not here because you chose philosophy as a casual interest. You're here because your wealthy family paid a small fortune to have you molded into a perfect thinker, or because you showed enough mathematical talent that Plato himself admitted you despite your modest background. Either way, there's no backing out now. The Academe isn't a place you attend, it's a life you surrender to. The entrance to the Academe bears a now famous inscription, "Let no one ignorant of geometry enter here." It wasn't just a catchy slogan. It was your first warning. Plato believed mathematics was the foundation of all knowledge, the key to understanding reality itself. If you thought you were joining to discuss poetry or rhetoric, you're in for a brutal awakening. Your morning doesn't start with breakfast, it starts with geometric proofs, abstract mathematical concepts, and mind-bending theoretical exercises. And all of this happens before the sun has fully risen. You rub the sleep from your eyes and slip into your chiton, the simple tunic that serves as the unofficial uniform of students. Your sandals are worn at the heel from countless hours pacing in circles during walking debates. Your stomach growls, but hunger is considered a distraction from pure thought. Plato believed that physical desires clouded the mind. So yes, you'll eat eventually, a simple meal of barley bread, olives, and watered-down wine, but only after you've proven yourself worthy through intellectual labor. As you step outside into the Academe's garden, the air is cool and the light still dim. The olive trees cast long shadows across the grounds. This isn't a university campus as you understand it. There are no grand buildings, no lecture halls with stadium seating. The Academe is essentially a sacred grove dedicated to the hero Academos, with a few modest structures for shelter and study. Most learning happens outdoors, in circles of students gathered around a master, or in pairs engaged in dialectical combat. Your first task of the day? Standing in perfect silence for 1 hour, contemplating the nature of the One, Plato's concept of ultimate reality. No fidgeting, no scratching, no casual glances at the pretty student from Rhodes. Just you, your increasingly uncomfortable body, and abstract metaphysics. Some mornings instead you might be asked to contemplate a single geometric shape until you can visualize it perfectly from all angles in your mind. Is this philosophy or torture? You wonder silently. The answer, in Plato's Academe, is both, and your day has only just begun. The sun is now rising, casting golden light across the olive. Plato himself emerges from his quarters. He's not the grandfatherly sage with flowing white beard that Renaissance painters would later imagine. He's a robust man in his 50s, with intense eyes that seem to dissect your soul, a wrestler's physique, and a name that literally means broad-shouldered. Before founding the Academe, Plato was a champion wrestler, and he brings that same physical intensity to philosophy. Students who fall asleep during lectures have been known to get a very physical wake-up call. As the master approaches, everyone falls into perfect silence. Not from fear, though there is that, but from genuine reverence. Despite the brutal intellectual regime, you're studying with the student of Socrates, the man who redefined what philosophy could be. Even your aching back and empty stomach can't diminish that reality. Plato begins without preamble. No good morning, no checking if everyone's comfortable. He simply launches into a question so complex you feel your brain cramp trying to process it. What is the relationship between the good and the nature of being itself? He's not asking you specifically, not yet, but you know your turn will come. There's no raising hands here. Plato points at students seemingly at random, demanding immediate, coherent responses. When he does call on you, there are only 3 acceptable outcomes: a brilliant answer that advances the discussion, a thoughtful question that redirects it in a valuable way, or, most commonly, a crushing public humiliation as Plato systematically dismantles your reasoning in front of everyone. The Socratic method isn't a friendly exchange of ideas. It's intellectual surgery performed without anesthesia, cutting away at bad arguments and lazy thinking, until nothing but the truth remains, if you're lucky. Your first morning lecture has barely begun, and already you're drowning, not in water, in words. Words so precise they cut like knives, concepts so abstract they make your temples throb. You came to the Academe thinking you were smart. Within an hour, Plato has systematically dismantled that comfortable illusion. The Socratic method isn't the gentle back and forth you've heard about in modern universities. It's an intellectual blood sport. When Plato asks, "What is justice?" he's not looking for your opinion. He doesn't care what you feel or what you've heard. He wants you to define justice with such mathematical precision that not a single logical exception can be found. And then, when you inevitably fail, he'll spend the next hour exposing every flaw in your reasoning while your classmates watch your intellectual execution. Justice is giving each person what they are owed, you might venture, thinking this sounds reasonable. Plato's eyebrows rise slightly. Bad sign. Is it just to return a borrowed weapon to a man who has gone mad? He asks. Well, no, but then your definition fails. Try again. This goes on for hours. It's not personal. Plato does this to everyone. Except maybe Aristotle, his star pupil who sits in the front row, smirking slightly at your struggles. Even he, though, gets regularly dismantled when his arguments lack precision. No one is safe. The Academe isn't about building self-esteem or encouraging creative expression. It's about breaking down everything you think you know and rebuilding your mind from first principles. You notice something strange about the lectures too. Plato rarely tells you what to think. Instead, he forces you to reach conclusions through relentless questioning. Just when you think you've arrived at an insight, he demolishes it with a counterexample or a logical paradox. It's exhausting, disorienting, and sometimes feels deliberately cruel. Isn't the point to teach us the truth? A frustrated student once asked. If I simply told you what to think, Plato replied, you would learn nothing but obedience. The goal isn't knowledge, it's understanding. That distinction between passive knowledge and active understanding is at the core of Plato's philosophy. He doesn't want you to memorize answers. He wants you to struggle, to suffer even, until your mind breaks through to genuine comprehension. It's why there are no textbooks at the Academe, no standardized curriculum, no comforting study guides, just endless, merciless questioning. By mid-morning, your brain feels like it's been stretched on a rack. Your throat is dry from defending indefensible positions. The student next to you looks like he might weep from intellectual exhaustion. Plato, meanwhile, appears energized, pacing as he speaks. occasionally stopping to sketch a geometry diagram in the dirt with a stick to illustrate some abstract point about proportionality and stis. You've heard rumours about students who broke under this pressure. Some stormed out, never to return. Others fell into depressive silence for days. One reportedly began laughing uncontrollably during a lecture on the immortality of the soul and had to be removed from the Academy grounds. Mental breakdowns weren't just common, they were almost expected, like an initiation ritual. If you haven't questioned your entire perception of reality at least once a week, you're not really participating. The most brutal part: there's no validation. Even when you make a good point, Plato doesn't praise you. He simply nods slightly and continues probing deeper. And what follows from that? He'll ask, pushing you further into the philosophical abyss. The rare moments when Plato says, "That's not entirely wrong," are celebrated like major victories among the students. You'll replay them in your mind for weeks. Adding to the pressure is the audience. The Academy isn't isolated from Athenian society. Important men, politicians, wealthy merchants, visiting intellectuals often observe the sessions. They're evaluating not just Plato, but you as well. Athens is a small world, and your performance here could determine your future prospects. Fall apart under Plato's questioning, and word might spread that you lack the intellectual fortitude for serious responsibility. By the time the morning session ends, your chiton is damp with nervous sweat. Your head pounds. Your mouth tastes metallic from anxiety. And you haven't even eaten yet. The thought of food is both desperately appealing and slightly nauseating after the mental battering you've just endured. As students disperse, conversations don't turn to gossip or social plans. The arguments continue, with students forming small clusters to debate points raised during the lecture. Even relaxation is philosophical here. There's no escape from the relentless pursuit of truth. You overhear an older student coaching a younger one. Never say "I think" or "I believe." Plato will seize on that immediately. Always say "it appears that" or "it seems to follow that." It gives you room to retreat if needed. These verbal fencing techniques are essential survival skills at the Academy. The wrong phrasing can trap you in a logical corner from which there's no escape. The right phrasing might give you just enough flexibility to avoid total humiliation. Students develop these defensive verbal tactics out of pure necessity, learning through painful experience which linguistic formulations are safer than others. As you walk toward the olive groves to catch your breath before the mathematics session begins, you consider the strangest part of all this. Despite the mental anguish, you feel oddly alive. There's something intoxicating about the pure pursuit of truth, about having your mind stretched to its absolute limits. It hurts, yes, but it's a productive kind of pain, like muscles tearing and rebuilding stronger. Still, you wonder how many more days like this you can endure before something inside you breaks. The Academy isn't just challenging, it's transformative, altering not just what you know, but who you are. And transformation, as Plato himself often says, is never without suffering. If you thought the Academy was a brotherhood of equals united in the pursuit of wisdom, think again. Like any institution, even one dedicated to the highest ideals, Plato's school has its own rigid social hierarchy, complete with cliques, favourites and outcasts. And as the newest student, you're starting at the bottom. The social structure isn't based on wealth or family connections, as in the rest of Athenian society. That would be too obvious, too mundane for philosophers. Instead, the hierarchy is based on something far more brutal, perceived intellectual ability. Your worth is determined entirely by how well you can think, argue, and defend your positions during those merciless daily debates. At the top of this intellectual food chain sit Plato's favourites, students like Aristotle, Speusippus, Plato's nephew, and Xenocrates. They dine closer to the master, receive more direct instruction, and sometimes even assist in teaching newer students. These elite few are treated with a mixture of reverence and resentment by everyone else. They've survived years of intellectual hazing and emerged as genuine philosophers in their own right, Just below them are the solid performers, students who regularly contribute meaningful insights but haven't quite achieved star status. Then come the middling masses who occasionally say something worthwhile but mostly serve as intellectual punching bags to demonstrate the fallacies Plato wants to highlight. And at the bottom, the aporia cases, students who consistently fail to grasp the concepts, who speak in circular reasoning, who might be asked to leave if they don't improve soon. Where are you in this hierarchy? That's being determined right now, in your earliest days, as everyone watches how you handle the pressure. One brilliant insight might elevate you. One embarrassing logical fallacy could condemn you to months of subtle ridicule. Don't make eye contact with Thrasymachus, whispers a slightly senior student as you walk to the mathematics session. He's looking for someone to destroy in this afternoon's dialectic. He needs to impress the visiting Pythagoreans. This is another reality of Academe life, student-on-student intellectual violence. While Plato might be the ultimate authority, you'll spend most of your time arguing with fellow students. Some approach these exchanges with genuine collaborative spirit. Others see them as opportunities to climb the social ladder by publicly humiliating their peers. Thrasymachus, not the character from Plato's Republic, but a student named after him, is notorious for the latter approach. He doesn't just want to defeat your argument, he wants to destroy your credibility, to make you question whether you belong here at all. And he's very, very, very good at it. The physical environment doesn't help. The Academe grounds, for all their olive tree beauty, offer little privacy. You sleep in shared quarters, eat communal meals, and spend nearly every waking hour in the presence of others. There's nowhere to hide, nowhere to lick your intellectual wounds in private. If you break down in tears after a particularly brutal debate, as many do, it happens in full view of everyone. Even bathroom facilities are rudimentary and communal. Bodily functions are just that, functions, not sources of shame. But this lack of physical privacy combines with the constant intellectual exposure to create a peculiarly vulnerable existence. You are always watched, always judged, always performing. You know what they call the student dormitory. Jokes a grizzled third-year student at the water fountain. The cave. Because we're all chained together, watching shadows, thinking they're reality. He's referencing Plato's famous allegory, of course, but the joke has a bitter edge. The social dynamics of the Academe can feel like a twisted psychological experiment. Who will break first? Who will adapt? Who will rise to become a true philosopher king? The psychological toll is obvious on the faces around you. Some students develop twitches, eyes that blink too rapidly, fingers that tap constantly against their thighs. Others adopt peculiar defense mechanisms, like the student who mutters definitions to himself between lectures, rehearsing for the next intellectual onslaught. One student is known for never sleeping more than 4 hours a night, using the extra time to review geometric proofs by lamplight. Physical appearance becomes secondary under these conditions. Students wear simple, practical clothing, often the same chiton for days at a time. Hair grows long and wild or gets shaved off entirely for convenience. No one wears makeup or jewellery. Such adornments would be seen as distractions from the life of the mind, evidence that you're still chained to physical appearances rather than focused on eternal forms. The result is a group of increasingly dishevelled, intensely focused individuals who might look slightly mad to outsiders. Which, in a way, you all are, mad with the pursuit of wisdom, willing to sacrifice normal comforts and social conventions in service to philosophy. Even romantic relationships take on a strange character here. Physical attraction isn't discussed directly, too base, too bodily. Instead, students develop intense intellectual crushes on those whose minds they admire. You might stay up all night debating the nature of courage with someone not, because you find them physically attractive, but because their reasoning skills make your heart race. Plato's views on love are complex. He writes of an ascending ladder that begins with physical attraction, but ultimately leads to the love of wisdom itself. At the Academe, students attempt to bypass the lower rungs entirely, reaching for those higher forms of love without acknowledging the bodily reactions that still, inevitably, occur. This creates its own tensions and jealousies. When Plato praises a student's insight, the others watch carefully for signs of favoritism. When study partnerships form, whispers follow. Is it purely philosophical, this partnership? Or is something more earthly happening as they trace geometric forms in the sand together? All of this unfolds against the backdrop of Athenian society, which has its own complicated relationship with physical and intellectual intimacy between men. The Academy doesn't exist in isolation. It's a product of its time and place, even as it attempts to transcend mundane concerns. Just remember, advises an older student as he helps you find your place for the mathematics lesson. Everyone here is struggling, even if they hide it well. We're all climbers on the same mountain, just at different heights. It's a rare moment of solidarity in a world designed to test not just your intellect, but your very sense of self. Tomorrow, this same student might publicly dismantle your argument about the nature of courage. Today, he's offering a small kindness. Both are part of the Academy experience. By midday, your stomach is growling audibly, an embarrassing bodily intrusion into the realm of pure thought. It's finally time for the Academy's version of lunch, a meal that, like everything else here, is designed not for pleasure but for function. The dining area is simple, stone benches arranged in a semicircle under a wooden canopy that provides minimal protection from the Athenian sun. No tables, those are for the symposia, the evening philosophical banquets that senior students occasionally attend. For everyday meals, you balance your food on your lap and try not to spill. The menu makes modern prison food look gourmet. Central to the Academy diet is maza, a barley cake so dense and dry it could double as building material. It's made by mixing barley flour with water and a touch of olive oil, then forming it into discs that harden as they cool. The resulting food requires serious commitment to chew and even more water to swallow. But it's filling and practical, exactly what Plato believes food should be. Accompanying the maza olives, lots of olives. The Academy grounds include an olive grove, providing a ready supply. These aren't the plump, marinated delicacies of modern Mediterranean cuisine. They're small, bitter, and often slightly underripe. Their primary virtue is that they provide necessary fat without requiring cooking. A small portion of fresh cheese might appear if you're lucky. Made from goat's milk, it's tangy and crumbly, with none of the refinement of aged cheeses. Occasionally there's a thin soup of lentils or fava beans, seasoned minimally with herbs from the Academy garden. Meat? Almost never. Plato believes meat makes the mind sluggish and inflames the passions. Following Pythagorean influence, he views vegetarianism as more conducive to clear thinking. The rare exceptions come during religious festivals when animal sacrifice makes meat available. Even then, portions are symbolic rather than satisfying. As for drinks, water is the daily standard, fetched from the Academy's well and stored in clay amphorae that keep it relatively cool. Wine appears only at formal meals, always heavily diluted with water in the Greek fashion. Drinking undiluted wine is considered barbaric, a practice of uncivilized peoples who lack philosophical restraint. Food is fuel, not pleasure, Plato himself often remarks. The philosopher seeks satisfaction in ideas, not flavors. It's a principle literally manifested in every bland bite you take. The student who subsists on nothing but maza and water for a week straight receives subtle nods of approval. Eating itself is a brief affair, 30 minutes at most. Mealtimes aren't for relaxation but for continuation of the day's discussions. As you chew the impossibly dry barley cake, senior students pose questions about the morning lectures. What were the weaknesses in Glaucon's position on justice? How does the theory of recollection solve the paradox of inquiry? There's no escape from philosophy, not even during lunch. The dining hierarchy is visible in seating arrangements. Plato and his closest associates sit slightly apart, their conversations pitched lower but no less intense. Newer students cluster together at the edges, watching the intellectual performances at the centre. Even the act of chewing becomes self-conscious under these conditions. Too loud and you seem uncouth. Too slow and you appear distracted. Table manners, or rather bench manners, are simple but strict. Food is eaten with hands, but wiping those hands on your chiton is considered disgraceful. Small cloths are provided for cleaning fingers. Speaking with your mouth full is an intellectual sin, evidence that the body's demands have overridden the mind's discipline. The worst offence, though, is complaining about the food. One unfortunate student from a wealthy Athenian family once remarked longingly about the delicacies served at his father's house. Plato fixed him with a stare cold enough to chill wine and asked, "If your thoughts are on rich foods, how can they simultaneously dwell on rich ideas?" The student wasn't formally expelled, but he departed shortly thereafter, unable to bear the subtle ostracism that followed. This isn't just asceticism for its own sake. Plato genuinely believes that simple living creates better thinkers. In his Republic, he outlines his vision of the ideal diet for the guardian class, the philosopher kings who would rule his utopia. What you're experiencing is a practical implementation of that theory. The results are debatable. Some students thrive on the discipline, finding their minds clearer and more focused. Others develop a haunted, hollow-cheeked look after months of philosophical fasting. A few secretly supplement their diets with dried fruits or nuts smuggled from the market, eating them furtively between lectures. Perhaps the most psychologically challenging aspect is the sheer repetition. The Academy menu varies minimally with the seasons, but the core remains unchanging. The same marza, the same olives, day after day after day. The monotony becomes its own form of torture, especially for students from cultures with richer culinary traditions. "You think this is bad?" says a student from Egypt, noticing your grimace as you bite into a particularly bitter olive. Wait until winter when the olive harvest is done. Then it's marza, and whatever root vegetables haven't rotted in storage. Despite the culinary austerity, mealtimes serve important social functions. Alliances form over shared complaints about the morning's most brutal logical dissections. Quiet students sometimes find their voice during these less formal exchanges, and occasionally genuine philosophical breakthroughs happen over mouthfuls of barley cake, sparking excitement that makes everyone momentarily forget the blandness of what they're eating. As lunch concludes, slaves, yes, the Academy has a few, despite Plato's egalitarian ideals, collect the remaining food. Nothing is wasted. Leftover marza is fed to the pigs kept on the Academy's small farm plot, completing a cycle of subsistence agriculture that helps fund the school's operations. You stand and brush crumbs from your chiton, your stomach technically full but somehow still unsatisfied. The physical hunger has been addressed, but something else remains, a different kind of appetite that even the richest feast couldn't satisfy. It's the hunger for understanding, for clarity, for the pure forms that Plato insists lie beyond the shadowy world of appearances. That hunger, at least, the Academy promises to feed. Whether you can survive its method of intellectual force feeding is another question entirely. After lunch comes the part of the day most students secretly dread, mathematics. Remember that inscription at the Academy entrance? Let no one ignorant of geometry enter here. Plato wasn't kidding. His obsession with mathematics borders on religious devotion, and at the Academy his faith becomes your daily torment. You gather with other students in the designated mathematics area, a flat, sandy space where geometric shapes can be easily drawn and erased. The ground is already covered with the remnants of earlier diagrams, half-erased circles intersecting with faded triangles like ghosts of yesterday's proofs. Today's instructor isn't Plato himself, but Theaetetus, one of his senior associates. Theaetetus looks like mathematics personified, thin to the point of gauntness, with long, precise fingers and eyes that seem to see in angles and proportions rather than colours. They say he once spent 3 days without food or sleep while working on a proof involving regular solids. Looking at him, you believe it. Today he announces without preamble, we continue our investigation of irrational numbers. A collective groan, subtle but unmistakable, ripples through the students. Irrational numbers are the Academy's particular obsession. When the Pythagoreans discovered that some numbers, like the square root of 2, couldn't be expressed as ratios of whole numbers, they considered it so disturbing they allegedly drowned the discoverer to keep it secret. Plato's Academe, by contrast, dives headfirst into this mathematical heresy. Theaetetus begins by drawing a perfect square in the sand. If the side length is 1 unit, he says, "What is the length of the diagonal?" This seems simple enough. You've been taught the Pythagorean theorem. If the sides are 1, then the diagonal squared equals 12 or 2. So the diagonal equals the square root of 2. But here's where it gets maddening. Theaetetus doesn't just want the answer. He wants a proof that this number cannot be expressed as a fraction, a ratio of 2 integers. And he wants this proof constructed step by step, with ruthless logical precision. For the next 2 hours, you and your fellow students struggle through this proof, using a method of contradiction. You assume the square root of 2 can be expressed as a fraction reduced to lowest terms, follow the logical consequences, and arrive at a contradiction, meaning your initial assumption must be false. It's elegant, it's beautiful, and it's absolutely excruciating to work through. One misstep in the logical chain, one moment of confusion about even and odd numbers, and you're lost. Theaetetus shows no mercy for those who can't keep up. If you cannot follow this, he says to one struggling student, perhaps philosophy is not your calling. The brutal reality is that many students come to the Academe unprepared for its mathematical rigour. They expect to discuss justice, beauty, and the good life. Instead, they find themselves wrestling with geometric proofs, proportion theory, and the properties of three-dimensional solids. The dropout rate is highest during these mathematics sessions. But why is Plato so obsessed with mathematics? It's not just intellectual sadism. He genuinely believes mathematics is the key to understanding reality itself. For Plato, mathematical objects like circles and triangles are more real than physical objects. You can draw a circle in the sand, but it's never a perfect circle, just an approximation of the ideal circle that exists in the realm of forms. Mathematics, then, is the bridge between the physical world and the world of forms. It trains the mind to deal with abstract, perfect objects rather than flawed physical representations. When Theaetetus makes you prove the irrationality of the square root of 2 for the 5th time, he's not just teaching you mathematics, he's reorienting your entire way of thinking. The afternoon continues with a series of increasingly complex geometric constructions. Using only a compass and straightage, no measuring tools allowed, you must construct various shapes with specific properties. A square with double the area of a given square. A triangle with the same area as a given polygon. A line divided in extreme and mean ratio, what later centuries will call the golden ratio. These constructions aren't just puzzles, they're philosophical exercises. They force you to think about relationships and proportions rather than specific measurements. They train you to see the universal principles behind particular cases, exactly the mindset Plato wants to cultivate for approaching questions about justice, virtue, or the good life. The physical toll is surprising. Despite being mental work, these mathematical sessions leave you physically exhausted. Your back aches from bending over sand diagrams. Your eyes strain from focusing on fine lines and tiny symbols. Your fingers cramp from manipulating the compass and straightage with the precision Theaetetus demands. Worst of all is the mental fatigue, a deep, hollow feeling as your brain simply refuses to process one more proof, one more construction, one more logical chain. Modern cognitive scientists call this decision fatigue or mental depletion. The ancient Greeks had no such terminology, but they recognized the experience. When a student's arguments become sloppy or their constructions imprecise, Theaetetus might actually send them away to rest, understanding that the mind, like a bow, can lose its tension if overdrawn. Not that rest comes easily in the mental pressure cooker of the Academe. Even during breaks, you find yourself obsessively retracing proofs in your mind, worrying about mistakes, anticipating the next challenge. Some students develop a particular mathematical anxiety, a racing heart and sweaty palms whenever they're called upon to demonstrate a proof. By late afternoon, the mathematics session finally ends. The Academe dismisses the class with a homework assignment that would make modern calculus professors wince. Determine whether there are exactly 5 regular solids, no more and no less, and provide a complete proof of your answer. This innocent-sounding problem, later solved definitively by Euclid, could consume weeks of concentrated effort. As you rise from the sand, brushing geometric diagrams from your knees, you notice something strange. Despite the mental torture, there's a peculiar satisfaction in mathematical certainty. In a world of opinion and appearance, where arguments about justice or beauty never reach definitive conclusions, mathematics offers something rare, absolute truth. When you prove the irrationality of the square root of 2, it stays proven forever. This, perhaps, is why Plato placed mathematics at the center of his curriculum. In a world of shadows and approximations, mathematical truth provides a glimpse of the eternal. Even as you massage your aching neck and blink your tired eyes, you can't help but feel you've touched something transcendent today, something beyond the physical world of changing appearances. Or maybe you're just trying to justify the suffering. Either way, your day at the Academy is only 2/3 complete. The evening symposium still awaits, with its own unique blend of philosophical challenge and social performance. And after that, dreams filled with triangles, circles, and the whispered secrets of irrational numbers. As the afternoon progresses, you move from the mathematical torture chamber to what might seem like more comfortable territory, Plato's famous theory of forms. Finally, some actual philosophy, right? Something less rigid than geometric proofs. Think again. The theory of forms is the heart of Platonic philosophy, and at the Academy, it's not presented as an interesting idea to consider, it's taught as fundamental reality. Questioning it isn't just discouraged, it's treated as evidence of your intellectual limitations. Your session takes place in a shaded corner of the Academy grounds. Students sit in a loose semicircle facing an older instructor named Speusippus, Plato's nephew and eventual successor as head of the Academy. He has a less imposing presence than Plato, but compensates with an even more systematic, almost mathematical approach to philosophy. We begin, as always, with the distinction between appearance and reality, Speusippus intones. You've heard this opening before. It's the foundation of everything at the Academy. According to Plato, the world you perceive with your senses is merely a shadow, a poor imitation of the real world, the realm of forms. Every physical chair you've ever sat on is just an imperfect copy of the ideal form of chairness. Every act of courage you've witnessed is just a dim reflection of the perfect form of courage. This sounds abstract but elegant in modern philosophy textbooks. In practice, at the Academy, it's a grueling, methodical dismantling of everything you think you know. What is a tree? Speusippus asks, pointing to an olive tree nearby. A first-year student responds confidently, "That's a tree, an olive tree specifically." Speusippus smiles thinly. Is it? What follows is an hour-long deconstruction of the concept tree. Is a sapling a tree? What about a dead tree? If you take a tree and remove one leaf, is it still the same tree? What about branch by branch until nothing remains? When does it stop being a tree? These aren't just fun thought experiments. They're systematic attacks on your reliance on sensory perception and common sense categories. By the end of the session, you'll start doubting whether you can truly know anything based on what you see, hear, touch, taste, or smell. The real tree, Speusippus insists, isn't the physical object at all, but the perfect, unchanging form of treeness that exists in the intelligible realm, accessible only through the intellect, not the senses. But how do we know these forms exist at all? asks a brave or foolish student. The reaction is swift and crushing. Speusippus doesn't just offer counter-arguments, he methodically demonstrates that the very question reveals the student's entrapment in sensory thinking. You're asking for sensory evidence of non-sensory reality, he explains with barely concealed contempt. It's like asking what colour mathematics is. The theory of forms isn't just academic at the Academy, it's existential. It restructures your entire perception of reality in a way that can be profoundly disorienting. Students often report a peculiar kind of dizziness after these sessions, a vertigo that comes not from physical height but from conceptual elevation. Speusippus continues, introducing the infamous third-man argument, a problem within the theory of forms that Plato himself acknowledged. If there's a form of human that all individual humans participate in, and this form is itself a kind of ideal human, wouldn't we need a third form to explain what the ideal form and physical humans have in common? And wouldn't this lead to an infinite regress of forms? The class collectively stiffens. This is dangerous territory. Criticizing the theory of forms is Plato's prerogative alone. For students, acknowledging these problems without appearing to reject the theory requires philosophical tightrope walking of the highest order. One student attempts a response, suggesting that the forms are not separate in the way the argument assumes. Speusippus pounces, demanding clarifications of separate that quickly lead the student into contradictions and confusion. Another proposes that forms are patterns, not perfect exemplars. This too is systematically dismantled until the student falls silent, mentally exhausted. By the session's end, no one has solved the third-man problem, nor were they expected to. The point wasn't to find answers, but to engage in the process, to experience the limitations of language and logic when discussing fundamental reality. What makes these theory of form sessions particularly grueling is their combination of abstraction and personal implications. You're not just discussing abstract metaphysics, you're having your entire worldview challenged, your most basic assumptions questioned. When Plato argues that the physical world is a mere shadow of reality, he's telling you that everything you've ever experienced directly is essentially your loved ones, your hometown, your own body, all just flickering shadows on the cave wall. The real you isn't your physical body, but your immortal soul, temporarily trapped in flesh, straining to recollect its knowledge of the forms. This isn't just philosophy, it's psychological restructuring. Some students embrace it enthusiastically, finding liberation in the idea that physical limitations aren't ultimate reality. Others experience what we might now call existential crisis, lying awake at night wondering if anything they perceive is real. Between sessions, students debate applications of the theory. Are Athenian laws mere shadows of perfect justice? Is democracy just a poor imitation of true governance? These aren't abstract questions in 4th century BCE Athens, but politically charged discussions with real-world implications. Plato himself sometimes joins these form theory sessions, particularly when discussions turn to the form of the good, the supreme form that illuminates all others, comparable to the sun in his famous allegory. When he speaks of the good, his voice takes on a different quality, less analytical, more reverent. This isn't just philosophy anymore, it's approaching theology. As the session concludes, Speusippus assigns what seems like a simple task. Identify 3 physical objects and explain how they participate in their respective forms. But like everything at the Academy, this apparently straightforward assignment contains hidden traps that will ensnare the unwary. You leave the session physically intact but metaphysically shaken. The olive tree you pass is no longer just a tree, but a philosophical problem, an ontological question mark. Even your own hands seem somehow less solid, less real than they did this morning. This is the true power of Academy education. It doesn't just add information to your mind, it transforms how your mind itself operates. Whether this transformation is enlightenment or a specialized form of madness remains an open question, one that will haunt you through the night ahead. Just when your brain feels like an overcooked octopus, squishy and unable to grasp anything firmly, the Academe throws you a curveball: physical education. That's right. The same institution that spends hours convincing you your body is a mere shadow of reality expects you to train it rigorously. Welcome to the bizarre mind-body philosophy of Plato's gymnasium. As the afternoon sun begins its descent, students gather in the palæstra, the wrestling ground adjacent to the Academe. You change from your intellectual uniform into a training chiton, or sometimes nothing at all. Nudity is common in Greek athletic training, another cultural shock for modern sensibilities. Your body, with all its imperfections, is now on display for the same people who just witnessed your intellectual fumbling hours earlier. A sound mind in a sound body is not a preference but a necessity, Plato often says. Despite his focus on the eternal soul, he insists that proper philosophy requires physical fitness. The reasoning: your body is the vehicle for your soul's journey. A weak vehicle makes for a difficult journey. Physical training at the Academe follows the traditional Greek model with a philosophical twist. It's not just exercise, it's embodied metaphysics. Every movement is an opportunity to contemplate the relationship between the changing physical world and unchanging mathematical truths. The session begins with wrestling instruction from a professional trainer, usually a retired athlete who looks at philosophers with barely concealed amusement. He demonstrates holds and throws that have been refined over centuries of Greek athletic competition. Unlike modern wrestling, Greek style emphasizes continuous action. Matches end only when one competitor is forced to the ground 3 times. For someone who spent the day in abstract thought, the sudden physicality is jarring. There's no hiding behind clever words or logical distinctions when someone is trying to throw you to the ground. Your body either responds correctly or it doesn't. The dust of the palæstra coats your skin, working its way into every crevice. The smell of sweat, yours and others, replaces the scent of olive trees and parchment. You're paired with another student, perhaps deliberately someone with whom you've had philosophical disagreements. Physical competition serves as a different kind of dialectic, a testing of strengths and weaknesses without words. Some students approach wrestling as a direct continuation of their philosophical arguments, bringing intellectual rivalries into physical form. What's surprising is how many of the pure intellectuals transform on the wrestling ground. The skinny mathematician who struggled to make eye contact during debates suddenly displays unexpected strength and agility. The eloquent debater who dominated morning discussions now stumbles clumsily, unable to translate verbal grace into physical movement. Plato himself was reportedly named for his broad shoulders, Platon suggesting physical width, and was a successful wrestler in his youth. Now in his 60s, he occasionally demonstrates a hold or corrects a student's technique, revealing glimpses of the athlete beneath the philosopher. It's disconcerting to see the man who discoursed on eternal forms now grappling with sweaty students. But that's precisely his point. Philosophy isn't an escape from the body, but a discipline that encompasses it. After wrestling comes running, laps around the Academe grounds that leave you breathless and dizzy. The trainers show no mercy for your intellectual exhaustion. If anything, they push harder, insisting that mental fatigue is often just physical weakness in disguise. Your body is lying to you about its limits, shouts the trainer as students stagger around the final lap. Question its claims as rigorously as you question a flawed definition. Then come the ball games, sphaira, played with leather balls of various sizes. These aren't just recreation but training in spatial awareness and group coordination. The mathematical principles discussed in morning sessions are now applied instinctively as you calculate angles and forces in real time. Throughout physical training, older students and instructors circulate, sometimes calling out philosophical questions between exercises. Define justice while maintaining this wrestling hold, or explain the difference between knowledge and opinion while completing your laps. It's educational multitasking at its most sadistic. Perhaps the most distinctive feature of Academe physical training is its emphasis on rhythm and harmony. Students learn dance movements that embody mathematical proportions, physical expressions of the numerical relationships so central to Platonic thought. These aren't flamboyant performances but precise, almost austere movements designed to align body and mind with cosmic principles. The physical education isn't optional or secondary, it's integral to academy life. Students who excel intellectually but neglect their physical training receive as much criticism as those who fail to grasp abstract concepts. The goal isn't to produce professional athletes but to develop balanced individuals whose physical discipline reinforces their mental discipline. This holistic approach makes the Academy different from other philosophical schools. The Epicureans will later emphasize pleasant living, the Stoics will focus on mental fortitude, but the Platonists insist on the cultivation of both mind and body as interconnected aspects of the philosophical life. By the time physical training ends, your body hurts in ways you never imagined possible. Muscles you didn't know existed announce their presence through pain. Bruises from wrestling form a colourful map across your skin. Dust and sweat have transformed your hair into a stiff, sculptural arrangement. Yet strangely, your mind feels clearer. The metaphysical vertigo from the forms discussion has subsided, grounded by physical exertion. The mathematical problems that seemed hopelessly abstract now appear more tractable. It's as if the physical activity has reconnected you to the material world, preventing you from floating too far into abstract realms. You're also ravenously hungry, a bodily demand that can no longer be philosophized away. Dinner will be another simple meal, but after physical training, even dry barley cakes and olives will taste ambrosial. As you head to the baths to clean off the day's accumulation of dust and sweat, you notice small groups of students still practicing wrestling moves or discussing the day's philosophical problems. The division between physical and intellectual activity blurs at these edges. A demonstration of a wrestling hold becomes an analogy for a logical relationship. A geometric diagram drawn in the dust illustrates both a mathematical proof and a wrestling strategy. The baths themselves are modest compared to the elaborate facilities that will characterize later Roman culture. Simple pools of varying temperatures offer basic cleaning and muscle relief. Even here, conversation continues. Some of the day's most insightful exchanges happen in this liminal space between physical exertion and evening relaxation. You soak your aching body, listening to senior students debate whether physical pleasure is merely the absence of pain or a positive state in its own right. The irony doesn't escape you. Even while experiencing the embodied relief of hot water on sore muscleness, Platonists can't help turning the experience into an abstract philosophical question. As you dry off and dress for dinner, you realize you've completed the most physically demanding part of your academy day. But the most intellectually challenging portion may still lie ahead, the evening symposium, where philosophical discussion merges with social performance and political maneuvering. Your body may be tired, but your mind will find no rest yet. As the evening approaches, you might expect the Academy's grueling schedule to wind down, allowing for some relaxation or, dare you hope, actual fun. But the concept of leisure at Plato's Academy bears little resemblance to what you're imagining. The night brings not freedom, but a different kind of intellectual performance, the symposium. The symposium, literally drinking together, is a central institution of Greek intellectual life. Part structured debate, part dinner party, part wine-fueled philosophical exploration. These evening gatherings are where reputations are made and broken. And tonight you've been invited to one. Not all students attend every symposium. The honour is extended based on seniority, recent performance, or specific topics of discussion. Your invitation came this morning, a small clay token with tonight's theme inscribed on it. On the nature of pleasure. Is it merely the absence of pain? The location is one of the Academy's few indoor spaces. A modest room with reclining couches, clean eye, arranged in a U-shape around a central space. As a junior participant, you're assigned a position at the far end of the arrangement, sharing a couch with another student. More senior participants get individual couches, with Plato and the knights designated symposiarch, master of ceremonies, occupying the central positions. You arrive freshly bathed after your athletic exertions, wearing your cleanest chiton. Some students have applied olive oil mixed with light scent, an allowable vanity for special occasions. The atmosphere seems almost relaxed compared to the day's rigid instruction, but don't be fooled. The symposium may look like a party, but it's actually an extended oral examination with wine. The formal proceedings begin with libations to the gods, particularly Dionysus. Religious observance at the Academe is complex. Many suspect Plato himself holds unorthodox views about traditional deities, perhaps even verging on monotheism with his concept of the form of the good. But public piety is still observed, especially at social gatherings. Servers, usually slaves owned by the Academe as an institution, bring the first round of food. It's slightly more elaborate than the day's earlier meals, bread of higher quality, a wider variety of vegetables, perhaps even small portions of fish. Food at a symposium is meant to be sufficient but not excessive, enough to absorb the wine, but not so much as to induce drowsiness. The wine itself arrives in a large crater, where it's mixed with water. Drinking undiluted wine is considered barbaric, suitable only for Scythians and other non-Greeks who lack philosophical temperance. The ratio tonight is 3 parts water to 1 part wine, enough to loosen tongues but not enough to severely impair judgment. At least that's the theory. The symposiarch, tonight it's Aristotle, Plato's brilliant, if somewhat divergent student, establishes the rules. Each participant will speak in turn on the nature of pleasure, moving around the room in order. Questions may be posed after each speech. As the evening progresses, the structure will loosen, allowing for more free-flowing debate. This is where your day's worth of intellectual boot camp truly pays off or fails you completely. The physical setting may be more comfortable, the atmosphere more convivial, but the intellectual demands are just as rigorous, perhaps even more so, because now you're performing not just for your teachers but for your peers as well. Senior students speak first, offering sophisticated analyses drawing on everything from Homeric poetry to medical theories about bodily humours. Many reference previous Academe discussions, creating a dense web of allusions that you struggle to follow. The arguments range from hedonistic, pleasure is the only intrinsic good, to ascetic, pleasure is a dangerous distraction from truth, with complex positions in between. When your turn finally arrives, your mouth is dry despite the wine. You've been rehearsing possible arguments in your head, trying to find an approach that's original enough to be noticed but not so radical as to be dismissed. This balancing act between conformity and innovation is perhaps the most difficult aspect of Academe intellectual life. You begin speaking, conscious of every eye on you, particularly Plato's piercing gaze. You argue that pleasure cannot be merely the absence of pain, because certain pleasures, like mathematical discovery, arise not from satisfying lack but from engaging in activities that align with our nature as rational beings. As you speak, you notice subtle reactions, a raised eyebrow from Speusippus, a slight nod from a student known for his interest in psychology, a barely concealed yawn from a mathematician who finds these topics too soft compared to geometric proofs. Every non-verbal cue is noted and analysed even as you continue your argument. When you finish, the questions begin. They're not friendly clarifications but surgical strikes at the weakest points of your reasoning. If mathematical discovery brings pleasure because it aligns with our rational nature, asks a senior student, then why don't all people find mathematics pleasurable? Some find it painful. Before you can fully address this objection, another cuts in. You've assumed pleasure and pain are opposites, but couldn't they be entirely different categories of experience? Pain physical, pleasure psychological. The questions come faster than you can answer them thoroughly. This isn't just debate, it's intellectual hazing, testing whether you can maintain composure under pressure. Some questions are genuinely seeking clarification, others are designed primarily to display the questioner's own cleverness. Throughout this interrogation, Plato remains silent, observing. His opinion will likely come at the end, in a summation that somehow transcends the entire discussion, while acknowledging the contributions of favoured students. His verdict on your performance won't be explicit but conveyed through subtle inclusion or omission of your points in his synthesis. As the symposium continues, the wine flows more freely. The ratio might shift to 2 parts water to 1 part wine in later craters. This is when Academe symposia diverge most significantly from their counterparts in Athenian society at large. While other Greek drinking parties might devolve into increasingly ribald entertainment, flute girls, erotic games, or drunken singing, the Academe maintains its philosophical focus even as inhibitions lower. This isn't to say the atmosphere remains entirely formal. As the evening progresses, philosophical jokes emerge. Yes, philosophical jokes, perhaps the most rarefied form of humour ever created. How many Heraclitenes does it take to light a lamp? None. The fire is already becoming its opposite. Only in this setting could such a jest produce genuine laughter. Personal tensions and attractions also become more visible as the evening progresses. The student who ruthlessly questioned your argument earlier now shows unexpected warmth, suggesting a complex mixture of intellectual challenge and personal interest. Academe relationships are rarely simple. Intellectual admiration, philosophical alliance, and personal affection blend in ways that can be difficult to disentangle. By the time the symposium concludes, usually when the crater is empty or when Plato himself withdraws, it's well into the night. You've consumed more wine than is probably wise given tomorrow's dawn mathematics session, participated in arguments so abstract they make your brain feel physically stretched, and navigated a complex social landscape where every comment has both philosophical and personal implications. You leave slightly dizzy from wine, intellectual exertion, and lack of sleep. The walk back to student quarters is brief but disorienting in the darkness. Tomorrow will begin with a pounding head that even Plato's metaphysics can't explain away, just one more bodily reminder of the gap between ideal forms and physical reality. As you collapse onto your sleeping pallet, one thought provides cold comfort. At least you survived your first Academe symposium. Some students never receive that initial invitation. Others attend once and perform so poorly they're never invited back. You spoke, you were questioned, you endured. In the meritocracy of ideas that is Plato's Academe, that's no small achievement. You might think the Academe exists in some philosophical bubble, isolated from the messy realities of Athenian politics. You'd be dangerously wrong. Despite its location outside the city walls, Plato's school is deeply entangled with the political currents of Athens and the wider Greek world. And as a student, you're swimming in these treacherous waters whether you realize it or not. The morning after the symposium, your philosophical hangover is interrupted by an unusual commotion. Important visitors have arrived, a delegation from Syracuse, a powerful Greek colony in Sicily. They're not here for abstract discussions about the forms. They're here because Plato has a radical political agenda, and he's been trying to implement it in Syracuse for decades. This is the side of the Academe rarely mentioned in philosophy textbooks. It's not just a school, it's a political think tank with international ambitions. Plato's Republic isn't just a theoretical exercise. It's a blueprint he's actively trying to enact in the real world. Syracuse, under the rule of Dionysius II, has been his primary laboratory. Their chitons are finer than anything worn by students, their manner more imperious than philosophical. They've come to discuss practical governance, not to debate the nature of the good. As students, you're gathered to observe this meeting, part of your education in applied philosophy. The contrast between Academe austerity and Syracusan luxury creates an immediate tension. These are men who exercise real power, who command armies and manage state treasuries. Next to them, even Plato seems slightly diminished, his authority intellectual rather than political. The conversation reveals the Academe's political network and ambitions. Names of rulers, generals, and political factions from across the Greek world are mentioned casually, revealing connections you never suspected existed. Plato doesn't just know about these power players, he advises them, corresponds with them, sends his students to serve in their courts. Speaking of students, that's where you come in. The Academy isn't educating you simply for the sake of knowledge. Many graduates go on to serve as advisors to rulers, draft legislation, or govern cities. The school's curriculum, with its emphasis on mathematics, dialectic, and the theory of forms, is designed to produce not just philosophers of the philosopher kings, or at least their advisors. Who among your current students shows political promise? Asks the Syracusan delegate, eyeing the assembled group with the evaluating gaze of a man shopping for talent. Plato doesn't immediately answer, but his silence communicates volumes. You and your fellow students are potential exports, intellectual resources to be deployed across the Greek world to advance Plato's vision of rational governance. The pressure is palpable. Your performance in abstract debates about justice might determine whether you're sent to advise a distant tyrant in a few years' time. After the formal meeting, students cluster in small groups, whispering analyses of what just transpired. Political factions within the Academy become suddenly visible. Those who support Plato's Syracusan experiment, those who think it's a dangerous distraction, those who believe Athens itself should be the focus of reform efforts. It's the third time he's tried to create his republic in Syracuse, an older student tells you quietly. The first attempt ended with him being sold into slavery. The second failed when Dionysius I proved unstable. This might be his last chance to see his ideas implemented before he dies. This revelation transforms how you see the Academy. The dry discussions of political theory that filled your first weeks weren't purely theoretical, they were preparation for actual governance. The seemingly abstract question, what is justice, has concrete implications for how cities should be organized, how laws should be written, how power should be distributed. And Plato's answers to these questions are, by modern standards, shockingly authoritarian. His ideal state is ruled by an elite class of philosopher kings. Democracy, Athens' proud system, is ranked as one of the worst forms of government, just above tyranny. Poetry and drama are heavily censored. Social mobility is limited. As a student, your relationship to these political ideas is complicated. Expressing open disagreement with the fundamentals of Platonic political theory isn't really an option if you want to advance at the Academy. Yet blind adherence marks you as an unimaginative sycophant. The expected approach is to accept the basic framework while suggesting modest refinements or applications, a narrow path to walk. Politics extends to the Academy's internal governance as well. While Plato is unquestionably the school's leader, he relies on a council of senior members for many decisions. Watching how this council operates provides another level of political education, the practical art of building consensus, managing personalities, and exercising authority indirectly. Pay attention to how Speusippus positions himself in these discussions, advises an observant third-year student. He's Plato's nephew and likely successor. Every comment he makes is both philosophical and political, securing his position for when Plato is gone. This comment illuminates another reality of Academy life. You're witnessing a succession process unfold. Plato is in his 60s. Questions about who will lead after him simmer beneath the surface of daily academic life. Will it be Speusippus, his blood relative? Aristotle, his most brilliant student, who increasingly diverges from Platonic orthodoxy? Someone else entirely? The political dimension extends beyond leadership to the curriculum itself. When Plato emphasizes mathematics, he's not just sharing his intellectual preferences, he's shaping the kind of thinkers and leaders the Academy produces. When he dismisses rhetoric, the primary subject taught by rival educators, the sophists, he's making a political statement about what skills should qualify someone for leadership. Even the Academy's location, outside Athens' walls but close enough for easy access, reflects Plato's complex relationship with Athenian politics. He's part of the system but maintains critical distance. He educates Athens' elite youth, but teaches them to question the city's democratic foundations. The Academe simultaneously serves Athens and subverts it. As the Syracusan delegation prepares to leave, they extend invitations to several senior students to visit Sicily. These aren't casual tourism opportunities but potential political appointments, chances to put Platonic theory into practice in a real city-state. The selected students receive congratulations tinged with anxiety. Syracuse is known for political volatility. Previous Academe graduates sent there have faced exile, or worse, when political winds shifted. By midday, the delegation has departed, and regular Academe activities resume. But something has changed in your perception. The mathematical proofs, the dialectical exercises, the discussions of forms, they're not just intellectual training, they're political preparation. Plato isn't just teaching you to think clearly, he's moulding you into a particular kind of political actor. That night, lying on your sleeping pallet, you reconsider your position. You came to learn philosophy, but you've enrolled in something more akin to an ancient political science program with metaphysical foundations. Every concept you master, every argument you refine, has potential applications in governance. Your education isn't just about understanding reality, it's about changing it according to Platonic principles. Whether that prospect thrills or terrifies you depends on how closely your own political instincts align with Plato's. Either way, neutrality is no longer an option. At the Academe, even the most abstract philosophy is ultimately political. Every community has rules, but at Plato's Academe, rule-breaking takes on a philosophical dimension that transforms ordinary discipline into existential crisis. Forget detention or demerits. Punishment at the Academe is designed to recalibrate your very soul. You witness this system in action on your third day, when a student named Glaucon, no relation to Plato's brother in the Republic, commits what seems like a minor infraction. During morning dialectic, he responds to a question about justice with a definition borrowed almost verbatim from a popular sophist without acknowledging the source. Plato stops mid-sentence, his gaze sharpening. "That is not your thought," he says simply. The room falls silent. This isn't just about plagiarism as we understand it today. Ancient concepts of intellectual property were very different. It's about something far worse in Platonic terms, intellectual dishonesty, pretending to know what you don't know, the very sin that Socrates spent his life combating. Glaucon's punishment isn't announced immediately. Instead, Plato continues the lecture as if nothing happened, though the tension remains palpable. Only at the session's end does he address it. Glaucon will spend 3 days in philosophical isolation, he declares. No participation in discussions, no questions, no answers, only listening and reflection. This might sound mild by modern disciplinary standards, but in the communication-centric world of the Academe, it's devastating. For 3 days, Glaucon becomes a ghost physically present, but dialectically non-existent. When he raises his hand, he's ignored. When discussions happen around him, it's as if he isn't there. His intellectual identity is temporarily erased. The psychological impact is severe. By day 2, Glaucon looks physically ill from the exclusion. By day 3, there are rumours he's been seen weeping in the olive groves after hours. When his sentence ends, he delivers a public apology so raw and self-examining that several students look away in discomfort. This is Academe discipline at its most characteristic, targeting not the body but the soul, designed not to punish but to correct fundamental misalignments in character. The goal isn't to make rules followers, but to develop philosophers who police their own souls more stringently than any external authority ever could. Different infractions receive different corrections, each tailored to address the specific imbalance in the student's soul. For arrogance or excessive certainty, there's structured aporia. a series of specially designed dialectical exercises guaranteed to lead the student into complete intellectual confusion. The experience of having all your confident assertions systematically dismantled is humbling in the extreme. For intellectual laziness, there's additional physical training, not as punishment but based on Plato's belief that discipline must be developed holistically. The student who takes shortcuts in reasoning might be assigned extra running, not as penalty but as character development. For those who prioritize rhetoric over truth, using flashy language to hide weak arguments, there's the requirement to speak in the simplest possible terms for a week. No metaphors, no complex sentence structures, just basic subject-verb-object statements. For disrupting the community's harmony, there's temporary exclusion from symposia and social activities, forcing reflection on the value of intellectual community. In a world with limited social outlets, this isolation cuts deeply. The most serious infractions involve challenges to foundational Platonic doctrines. A student who persistently rejects the theory of forms or argues for hedonism might face probationary status or even dismissal. While Plato encourages questioning, there are boundaries to acceptable dissent, though these boundaries are never explicitly stated, leaving students to discover them through painful experience. What makes this disciplinary system particularly effective is its public nature. When a student is corrected, everyone watches and learns. The shame of public philosophical failure is a powerful deterrent, especially in a culture where honor and reputation are paramount. You learn quickly to avoid certain transgressions. Never pretend to understand what you don't understand. Better to admit ignorance than to fake knowledge. The former is curable, the latter is corruption of the soul. Never use rhetoric to win arguments at the expense of truth. Fancy wordplay might work in Athens courts or assembly, but at the Academe, it's seen as philosophical corruption. Never violate the specific intellectual terrain of a superior without permission. Challenging Plato directly on the theory of forms is acceptable only for his most advanced students. For newcomers, it's intellectual suicide. Never break the community's physical rules, scheduled activities, shared duties, behavioral expectations. The Academe might prioritize mind over body, but bodily discipline is seen as foundational to mental discipline. Beyond these formal corrections, there's an equally powerful informal system of peer enforcement. Students who commit minor infractions, speaking out of turn, making careless logical errors, displaying insufficient reverence for mathematical proofs, face subtle but cutting social consequences. These range from the slightly raised eyebrows of senior students to being passed over when forming study partnerships to the devastating experience of having your comments simply ignored in group discussions. In a community where intellectual recognition is the primary currency, these social sanctions sting sharply. What makes Academe discipline particularly challenging is its inconsistency. The same behavior might be tolerated or even praised in one student but harshly corrected in another. This isn't simple favoritism, though that exists too, but Plato's personalized approach to education. He believes different souls need different treatments. What would help one student might harm another. This individualized discipline creates a constant state of uncertainty. You're never entirely sure where the boundaries are, forcing a kind of hypervigilance that itself becomes exhausting. Students develop elaborate theories about what behaviors will be tolerated in whom and under what circumstances, creating a complex unwritten code that newcomers struggle to decipher. The physical environment reinforces this disciplinary system. The Academe has no cells, no dedicated punishment spaces, but the openness itself becomes a form of surveillance. There's nowhere to hide, physically or intellectually. Your errors are witnessed, your corrections are public, your growth or stagnation is continuously visible to all. Perhaps most disorienting for modern sensibilities is how this discipline blurs the line between education and correction. Being forced to recite mathematical proofs while standing in the hot sun isn't clearly punishment or teaching. It's both simultaneously, addressing deficiencies in both character and knowledge. For students from wealthy families used to indulgence and deference, This system proves particularly shocking. Many last only weeks before withdrawing, unused to having not just their ideas, but their very characters subjected to such rigorous examination and correction. Others find a strange comfort in the clarity of Academe discipline. Unlike the arbitrary punishments of typical Greek education, Platonic correction has purpose and rationale. It's never vengeful, never capricious, always aimed at improvement rather than suffering for its own sake. As you navigate your first week, you develop the necessary survival adaptations, strategic humility when uncertain, careful attribution of ideas, heightened awareness of unwritten boundaries. You learn to watch not just what senior students say, but how they say it, mimicking their carefully calibrated balance of confidence and caution. Most importantly, you begin internalizing the Academe's most fundamental disciplinary principle. The goal isn't to avoid external punishment, but to develop an internal philosophical monitoring system, to become, as Plato would put it, self-governing. The true philosopher doesn't need external correction because they continuously examine and correct themselves. Whether this system produces better philosophers or just more Platonic philosophers remains an open question, one you might privately consider, but would certainly never voice aloud within the Academe's olive groves. If you came to Plato's Academe expecting to balance philosophical rigor with artistic appreciation, perhaps discussing Homer over wine or attending dramatic festivals to analyze their philosophical themes, prepare for crushing disappointment. In the Academe, art isn't just secondary to philosophy, it's actively suspicious, potentially dangerous, and in many cases banned outright. On your fifth day, you experience this firsthand when another student is caught with a small scroll of poetry hidden among his mathematical texts. Not anything scandalous, just some verses by Sappho, the celebrated lyric poet. The reaction is immediate and severe. Poetry, Plato announces to the assembled students, is 3 times removed from the truth. It is a copy of reality, and it appeals to the lowest part of the soul. This isn't just theoretical position-taking. Plato genuinely believes poetry is psychologically harmful, especially for young minds still developing philosophical discipline. In his ideal republic, most poetry would be censored, and poets would be banished entirely, crowned with laurels as acknowledgement of their talents, but firmly escorted beyond the city boundaries. The offending student must surrender his scroll, which is not returned. Worse, he's assigned a philosophical exercise, write a detailed analysis of how specific passages might corrupt the soul by arousing inappropriate emotions or presenting false images of the gods. This incident offers a window into one of the most jarring aspects of Academe life for newcomers, its deeply ambivalent relationship with Greek artistic culture. You've grown up in a society that celebrates its poets, dramatists and musicians, that sees artistic and athletic excellence as expressions of human greatness. The Academe actively works to deprogram this cultural conditioning. According to Plato, most art, especially mimetic art that imitates appearances, reinforces our attachment to the physical world of becoming rather than elevating us toward the intelligible world of being. Poetry stirs emotions that should be governed by reason. Drama presents gods and heroes behaving immorally, providing bad examples. Music in the wrong modes can make the soul effeminate or savage rather than moderate and courageous. This position creates daily cognitive dissonance for students. You've grown up reciting Homer and watching tragedies at the Dionysian festivals. These cultural touchstones form the shared language of Greek society. Now you're told that your aesthetic education has been actively harmful to your soul's development. But aren't some of Plato's own writings essentially poetry? A brave student asks during a lecture on artistic corruption. The myths and allegories like the cave or the chariot. The distinction you learn is purpose. Plato's philosophical myths are designed to lead minds upward toward the forms, while traditional poetry tends to draw attention downward to the physical, emotional and particular. It's the difference between a ladder and a trap. Both are constructed objects, but they serve opposite purposes. The practical implications of this theoretical position are severe and sometimes comical. Students caught humming popular tunes are corrected immediately. When discussions of literature are necessary, texts are approached with clinical detachment, analysed for logical inconsistencies rather than appreciated for their beauty. During religious festivals, when most Athenians would be enjoying music, dance and dramatic performances, Academe students participate in a more restrained manner, observing rituals but avoiding the artistic elements that Plato considers potentially corrupting. This creates yet another boundary between Academe life and mainstream Athenian culture. Even the Academe's physical environment reflects this aesthetic austerity. While other philosophical schools and gymnasia in Athens might display sculptures or decorated pottery, the Academe's grounds are notably plain. Geometric patterns might be acceptable decorations, but representational art is largely absent. Some students find this artistic asceticism liberating, a focus on pure ideas without distraction. Others experience it as a kind of sensory deprivation, especially those with artistic temperaments who had hoped to integrate their aesthetic sensibilities with philosophical development. For students with poetic or dramatic talents, the Academe presents a painful choice: suppress these abilities as potentially harmful, or channel them exclusively into philosophical dialogues and myths that serve acceptable theoretical purposes. Many creative minds find this restraint intolerable and leave within months. Those who stay develop a peculiar relationship with art, appreciating it intellectually while remaining suspicious of its emotional effects, analysing its techniques, while resisting Weseg's charms. It's like learning to study food for its nutritional content, while deliberately numbing your taste buds to its flavour. I attended a tragedy last week, confesses a senior student in a quiet conversation by the well. For the first time in years, I found myself analysing its structure and emotional techniques, rather than simply experiencing it. Plato has permanently changed how I perceive art. I can never again be a naive spectator. This transformation of aesthetic experience is part of the Academe's broader project of reorienting the soul away from becoming and toward being, away from the changeable world of appearances and toward the eternal realm of forms. Art, with its focus on the particular, the emotional, and the physically embodied, represents everything the philosopher is trying to transcend. The irony, of course, is that Plato himself is one of Western civilization's greatest literary artists. His dialogues aren't dry philosophical treatises, but dramatic works with character development, setting, irony, and narrative arc. He condemns poetry while writing prose of unmatched beauty. He criticizes imitation while creating the character of Socrates, perhaps the most compelling philosophical imitation ever constructed. This contradiction isn't lost on the more perceptive students, who sometimes whisper about it during rare moments of unsupervised conversation. Is Plato unaware of his own artistry? Is he making a special exception for philosophical art? Or is there a deeper consistency that students simply haven't yet grasped? Whatever the resolution, the daily reality remains. At the Academe, your artistic sensibilities must be disciplined, redirected, or suppressed. Your emotional responses to beauty must be subject to rational control. Your cultural education in Greek poetry and drama becomes something to overcome rather than build upon. The few sanctioned artistic practices are tellingly mathematical in nature. Certain forms of music are permitted, specifically those in the Dorian and Phrygian modes, which Plato believes inspire courage and temperance rather than indulgence or lamentation. But even these must follow strict mathematical proportions and avoid innovations that might corrupt their beneficial effects. Similarly, certain dances are accepted as part of physical training, but these are geometric and militant rather than expressive or ecstatic. Their patterns embody mathematical relationships and military formations, not emotional expression. For most students, this artistic austerity becomes yet another form of philosophical discipline, another way that Academe life reshapes perception and desire. You learn to find beauty in mathematical relationships rather than sensory experiences, to appreciate the elegance of a proof more deeply than the elegance of a poem. You'll stop missing it eventually, An older student tells you when he notices you gazing longingly at a group of musicians performing in a nearby public space. Or at least you'll convert that appreciation into philosophical form. Whether that conversion represents enlightenment or impoverishment depends entirely on your pushment. What's certain is that it marks another way the Academy separates you from mainstream Greek culture, another aspect of ordinary experience that must be transformed in the pursuit of philosophical wisdom. By the end of your first week, you find yourself instinctively analysing the geometric patterns in birdsong rather than simply enjoying its beauty, a small but telling sign that Plato's aesthetic discipline is already reshaping your perceptions, for better or worse. After weeks of mind-bending dialectic, soul-crushing mathematics, and body-breaking exercise, you might reasonably wonder, do Academy students ever get to relax? Do they have anything resembling free time or leisure? The answer is yes, but like everything at Plato's school, leisure is philosophical, purposeful, and often indistinguishable from more work. The Greek concept of leisure, skol, from which we get our word school, bears little resemblance to modern notions of downtime. For Plato and his students, leisure isn't about entertainment or relaxation, but about freedom from necessary labour to pursue higher activities. The irony is perfect. What we call school work comes from the Greek word for leisure. Your first experience of Academy leisure comes on the seventh day, not exactly a Sabbath, since religious observances in ancient Greece follow a more complex lunar calendar, but a day with fewer scheduled activities. After morning exercises and a brief lecture, students have several hours before the evening meal with no assigned tasks. So what do Academy students do with this precious free time? If you're imagining wild parties in Athens, romantic adventures, or even simple pleasures like browsing the agora for trinkets, you've fundamentally misunderstood Academy life. Most students spend their leisure in continued philosophical activity, just self-directed rather than supervised. Small groups form under the olive trees, continuing debates from formal sessions or exploring tangential questions. Others retreat to quiet corners with scrolls from the Academy's modest library, studying texts by Pythagorean mathematicians or pre-Socratic natural philosophers. Is this really how everyone spends their free time? You ask a second-year student who seems approachable. What would you prefer to do? He responds with genuine curiosity. The question stumps you. After weeks of Academy conditioning, normal leisure activities seem frivolous or meaningless. Attending a comedy at the theatre of Dionysus. Plato has systematically critiqued drama as philosophically harmful. Drinking at a taverna. The Academy has trained you to see unregulated pleasure as dangerous to the soul. Shopping. Material acquisition is exactly the kind of lower soul activity you're being taught to transcend. This is perhaps the Academy's most profound transformation of its students, not just changing what they think but altering what they want. After sufficient immersion, philosophical activity genuinely becomes more appealing than conventional entertainment. When achieving mathematical insight provides more satisfaction than winning at dice, your fundamental pleasure system has been rewired. For those requiring physical activity during leisure hours, options exist but remain philosophically inflected. Some students engage in additional wrestling or running beyond the required sessions. Others take long walks through the olive groves and surrounding countryside, not idle strolls but peripatetic philosophical discussions. Walking and talking in the tradition Aristotle will later formalize in his own school. A few students use free time for quasi-artistic pursuits approved within Platonic parameters, geometric designs, mathematical compositions, or crafting dialogues in the Socratic style. These creative activities are carefully distinguished from the emotional self-expression of conventional art, their exercises in rational form giving rather than rational outlet. When the Academy does organize collective leisure, it takes distinctly philosophical forms. There are occasional field trips, not to the beach or countryside for relaxation, but to geometric or astronomical sites of interest. Students might be taken to observe stone masons using practical geometry in their work, or to a specific hillside at night for astronomical observations relating to mathematical harmony. During certain festivals, the Academy holds its own events parallel to but distinct from mainstream Athenian celebrations. While the city might be enjoying raucous processions for Dionysus, Academy students engage in more restrained observances, ritual meals with philosophical discussions related to the festival's themes, carefully moderated to maintain intellectual focus. Perhaps most telling is how Academy students approach the quintessential Greek leisure activity, the symposium. Where conventional Athenian drinking parties might include music, dancing girls, erotic games, and progressively drunken revelry, Academy symposia, as you've already experienced, remain primarily intellectual, even as the wine flows. Pleasure exists, but it's the pleasure of intellectual exchange, regulated by philosophical purpose. This leisure austerity creates a peculiar bubble around Academy life. After a few months, students often report feeling profoundly alienated during their rare visits to Athens proper. The city's normal activities, its commerce, entertainment, politics, and social life, start to seem not just uninteresting but actively disorienting, like a bizarre dream from which they're grateful to awaken when returning to the Academy's ordered environment. "I went home for the Panathenaea," confides a third-year student. "My family was exactly as I remembered, but I felt like a ghost among them. Their concerns seemed so trivial. They couldn't understand why I wasn't excited about the new statue on the Acropolis, or the latest political scandal. All I wanted to discuss was whether justice is a relation between actions or a state of the soul. This alienation from ordinary pleasures and concerns isn't an accidental byproduct of Academy education. It's a deliberate outcome. Plato's philosopher must ascend from the cave of conventional values and perceptions, and that ascent necessarily creates distance from those still chained within it. The leisure transformation is just one manifestation of this broader separation. For you as a new student, this reconfiguration of leisure creates a dilemma. The traditional outlets for stress relief no longer appeal as they once did, yet you haven't fully developed the capacity to find genuine refreshment in philosophical activity. You exist in a liminal state, too Academy-shaped to enjoy normal Greek leisure. Not yet philosopher enough to truly relax through dialectic. Homesickness takes a unique form in this context. What you miss isn't just family and familiar surroundings, but a simpler relationship to pleasure itself. The uncomplicated enjoyment of theatrical performance, a swim in the sea, or conversation unconstrained by philosophical examination. These ordinary pleasures now come wrapped in layers of Platonic analysis that make immediate experience almost impossible. Some students resolve this tension by developing a compartmentized double life, philosopher at the Academy, conventional Greek during brief visits home. Others embrace the transformation completely, finding genuine satisfaction in the intellectual pleasures that replace conventional entertainment. A significant number simply break under the strain, leaving the Academy to return to normal life with a mixture of relief and philosophical guilt. For those who remain, the leisure transformation becomes one of the clearest markers of their philosophical progress. The student who genuinely prefers solving geometric problems to watching athletic competitions, who finds dialectical sparring more invigorating than flirting at a symposium, has internalized Platonic values in the most fundamental way possible, at the level of desire itself. You'll know you're becoming a true philosopher. A senior student tells you with a small smile when you look forward to free time, because you can finally get back to classifying the different forms of government without interruption. The statement is partly joking, but it captures an essential truth. The Academy isn't just teaching you philosophy, it's turning you into a philosopher, with all the alienation from ordinary pleasures that transformation entails. Your choice isn't really between different leisure activities, but between different souls, the conventional soul that finds joy in common pleasures, and the philosophical soul that finds those same pleasures increasingly empty. As afternoon shadows lengthen across the Academy grounds, you watch your fellow students relaxing through geometric proofs, metaphysical debates, and close readings of obscure Pythagorean texts. What once would have seemed like tedious work now appears increasingly appealing. Your transformation has begun, for better or worse. Whether this reconfiguration of leisure represents liberation or indoctrination depends entirely on your perspective. What's undeniable is that it separates you from mainstream Greek culture as surely as any physical wall could, creating a boundary between philosophers and non-philosophers that extends into the most personal dimensions of life. What you do when no one is telling you what to do. If you imagine the Academe as a philosophical monastery, isolated from competing intellectual traditions, you've fundamentally misunderstood 4th century Athens. The city is a marketplace of ideas, with rival schools competing fiercely for students' reputation and influence. And while the Academe may be physically located outside the city walls, it's locked in constant intellectual combat with other philosophical movements. You discover this reality during your second month, when Plato announces a special event. Representatives from the school of Isocrates will visit for a public debate. The atmosphere instantly transforms from focused study to something approaching pre-battle tension. "Who's Isocrates?" you whisper to a more experienced student. The look you receive communicates both pity and disbelief. "Only Plato's chief intellectual rival in Athens," he explains. He runs a school focusing on rhetoric and practical politics rather than pure philosophy. Plato thinks he corrupts minds by teaching persuasion without truth. Isocrates thinks Plato wastes minds on useless abstractions. The anticipated debate isn't just academic entertainment, it's existential competition. In ancient Athens, with no state-funded educational system, schools like Plato's depend on reputation to attract students, particularly those who can pay. A poor showing against rivals could damage recruitment, funding, and ultimately the Academe's survival. On the appointed day, Isocrates himself doesn't appear. He's elderly and reportedly has a weak speaking voice despite teaching rhetoric, but he sends his star pupils. They arrive impeccably dressed in expensive chitons, their manner confident and polished, a stark contrast to the Academe's more austere presentation. The debate topic cuts to the heart of educational philosophy. What knowledge is most necessary for the good life and the good state? The Isocratean position emphasizes practical wisdom, political judgment, and rhetorical skill, the abilities needed to succeed in democratic Athens and influence public affairs. The Academe champions theoretical knowledge, especially mathematics and dialectic, as foundations for approaching any practical matter. What follows isn't the reasoned, systematic dialogue of Plato's written works. It's intellectual combat, fierce, sometimes personal, with moments of genuine brilliance interspersed with crowd-pleasing rhetorical flourishes. The Isocrateans excel at appealing to common sense and practical outcomes. The academics counter with deeper analysis that reveals the contradictions in seemingly obvious positions. Watching this debate provides your first real glimpse of how the outside world perceives the Academe. The Isocrateans portray Plato's students as unworldly theorists measuring imaginary triangles, while the real world burns around them. They mock the theory of forms as unfalsifiable mysticism and question the practical value of endlessly defining terms like justice, instead of actually working for justice in Athens. These criticisms sting partly because they contain elements of truth. You've experienced the Academe's detachment from everyday Athenian concerns, its obsession with theoretical precision, its dismissal of practical compromise as philosophical weakness. Hearing these tendencies described as flaws rather than virtues creates cognitive dissonance for many students. The Academe speakers counter by exposing the philosophical emptiness behind Isocratean rhetoric. They demonstrate how practical politics without philosophical foundations leads to contradiction and ultimate failure. They challenge the Isocrateans to define the good they claim to pursue through rhetoric, watching them stumble into the very definitional morass they criticized earlier. Throughout this intellectual spectacle, Plato himself remains silent, observing from a seat of honor. His expression reveals nothing, but his presence is felt in every argument the Academe speakers deploy. They are instruments of his philosophy, performing a dialectical battle he has prepared them for through years of rigorous training. This public debate is just the most visible manifestation of Athens' philosophical ecosystem. The city hosts several major philosophical and educational movements, each competing for intellectual territory. There are the remaining sophists, professional educators who teach rhetoric and practical skills for success in democratic politics. Plato depicts them as charlatans in his dialogues, but they remain influential and often wealthy from teaching the sons of aristocrats. The followers of Antisthenes, the Cynics, practice an ascetic philosophy emphasizing virtue through rejection of social conventions and material possessions. You occasionally spot them in Athens, deliberately unwashed and dismissive of social norms, challenging the Academe's more disciplined approach to philosophical life. The school of Aristippus teaches hedonism, the pursuit of pleasure, as the highest good. For Platonists, with their emphasis on controlling physical desires in favor of intellectual pursuits, the Cyrenaic focus on refined pleasure, seeking represents philosophical confusion of the highest order. Various pre-Socratic influences persist, from the mathematical mysticism of Pythagorean communities to the materialist explanations of natural phenomena advocated by atomists like Democritus. And then there's the internal rivalry that everyone pretends not to notice, the growing philosophical distance between Plato and his most brilliant student, Aristotle. Though still teaching at the Academe, Aristotle has begun developing positions that subtly contradict Platonic orthodoxy, particularly regarding the theory of forms. This intellectual tension creates ripples through the student body, with some aligning themselves with Platonic idealism and others with Aristotle's more empirical approach. For you as a student, this competitive intellectual environment creates both challenge and opportunity. The challenge comes in maintaining confidence in Platonic methods while being confronted with seemingly valid alternative approaches. More than one student has experienced philosophical crisis after engaging with rival schools, questioning whether years spent contemplating abstract forms might have been better dedicated to developing practical skills. The opportunity lies in the intellectual sharpening that comes from defending your positions against serious opposition. The strongest Platonic arguments emerge not from the echo chamber of internal Academe discussions, but from the forge of external criticism. Students who engage most effectively with rival positions often develop the most sophisticated understanding of Platonic philosophy itself. Academe leadership takes various approaches to managing this intellectual competition. Some encourage students to engage directly with rival texts and arguments, confident that Platonic philosophy will emerge stronger from the comparison. Others warn against contaminating pure philosophical inquiry with sophistic rhetoric or hedonistic temptations. The Academe's relationship with other schools also fluctuates between periods of hostile isolation and more open intellectual exchange. Under Plato's leadership, the school maintains a delicate balance, dismissive of sophistry and hedonism, respectful but critical of pre-Socratic natural philosophy, and engaged in complex dialogue with emerging Aristotelian approaches. For many students, the most disorienting aspect of philosophical competition is how it undermines the certainty that drew them to Plato in the first place. If you came seeking absolute truths, the existence of multiple sophisticated philosophical systems raises uncomfortable questions. Are there many valid paths to wisdom rather than one true way? Is philosophy ultimately more like politics than mathematics, with competing value systems rather than provable theorems? Plato's own position offers little comfort here. While he clearly believes in objective truth and the superiority of his philosophical method for approaching it, his dialogues often end in aporia, unresolved questions and contradictions. The tension between absolute truth and the limitations of human understanding creates philosophical vertigo that intensifies when confronted with rival schools making their own claims to wisdom. As the debate with the Isocrateans concludes without clear resolution, you walk back to the Academe grounds with fellow students, participating in the inevitable post-mortem analysis. Who scored the most points? Did the academics effectively defend the value of theoretical knowledge? Were the Isocrateans right about anything? The conversation continues long into the evening, eventually circling back to the foundational question: what knowledge truly matters? It's the same question that launched the debate, now internalized and personalized. In choosing the Academe over Isocrates School or other philosophical paths, have you chosen wisdom or merely one perspective on it? No answer arrives to resolve this doubt. Instead, it joins the collection of productive uncertainties that constitute a philosophical education. The purpose of the Academe, you're beginning to understand, isn't to eliminate all questions, but to transform you into the kind of person who asks better ones. Not everyone survives the Academe. For every Aristotle who emerges transformed and triumphant, there are dozens who fail, drop out, or worse, students whose stories aren't recorded in philosophical histories, but whose ghost goes up and near among the olive trees. Their failures aren't just academic, but often deeply personal, even existential. You first hear these whispered stories in your third month, when a student named Charmide stops appearing at morning lectures. No announcement is made, no explanation offered. He's simply gone, his sleeping spot reassigned, his name never mentioned by instructors. Only in hushed evening conversations do you learn what happened. He couldn't handle the mathematical requirements, explains a second-year student. Failed the same geometric proof 7 times. Plato finally told him philosophy might not be his path. That's the official version, counters another quietly. The truth is he had a complete breakdown during dialectic. Started arguing that nothing can be known, that definitions are impossible, that Plato's entire project is circular reasoning. Then he just stopped speaking altogether. His father came and took him home. These academic casualties are more common than the Academe's reputation suggests. The school celebrates its successes, the brilliant students who master the curriculum and go on to teach, govern, or found their own philosophical movements. The failures vanish into obscurity, their struggles serving as cautionary tales passed among students, but rarely acknowledged officially. The patterns of failure are diverse, but recognizable. There are the mathematically challenged, students who simply cannot master the geometric and arithmetic foundations Plato considers essential. Some struggle for months, hiring private tutors from their own funds, sleeping only briefly as they attempt to memorize proofs and relationships. Eventually, the gap between their abilities and the Academe's expectations becomes unbridgeable. Then there are the dialectically destroyed, those broken by the relentless Socratic questioning. Initially confident in their beliefs and definitions, they watch helplessly as these certainties are dismantled day after day. Without the ability to reconstruct more robust understandings, they're left in a state of complete aporia, confusion without resolution. Some become pathologically uncertain, questioning even the most basic assumptions until functioning becomes impossible. The physical casualties fall victim to the Academe's demanding bodily regimen. Not everyone can maintain peak intellectual performance while subjected to dawn exercises, minimal diets, and the physical strain of constant activity. Bodies break down, illnesses take hold, and the school shows limited patience for prolonged physical weakness. Perhaps most tragic are the spiritually dislocated, students who internalize Academe teaching so completely that they can no longer relate to wider Athenian society or even their own families. During home visits, they find themselves alienated from their previous social circles, unable to engage with normal concerns, viewing everyone through a judgmental philosophical lens. Yet they also struggle to find true belonging at the Academe, creating a painful limbo where they fit nowhere. My brother studied here for 2 years, confides a shopkeeper when you visit the Athens Agora for supplies. Now he can't hold a normal conversation. Analyzes everything to death, questions the most basic statements, until no one wants to talk to him anymore. Is that what philosophy is supposed to do? You have no good answer, because you recognize the symptoms in yourself, the growing tendency to interrogate assumptions, to seek precision in casual speech, to evaluate arguments rather than simply participating in conversations. The Academy isn't just teaching you philosophy, it's rewiring your social functioning in ways that can alienate you from non-philosophical society. Some Academy dropouts remain in Athens, creating an uncomfortable reminder of the school's failures. A former student now works as a scribe in the Agora, copying legal documents for a modest fee. Another has joined the theatrical world Plato so criticized, writing satirical plays that occasionally mock philosophical pretensions. The Academy officially ignores these departees, but their presence creates an alternative narrative about philosophical education and its human costs. The most disturbing failures are the true casualties, students who leave not for other pursuits but because their minds or spirits have been fundamentally damaged by the experience. Stories circulate about former students who became pathologically obsessed with philosophical problems, spending days in repetitive reasoning loops without sleeping or eating. Others allegedly developed profound depression after concluding that true knowledge is impossible, or that the gap between forms and physical reality is unbridgeable. These extreme cases are rare but significant enough to create anxiety among current students. When you struggle with a particular concept or feel overwhelmed by the curriculum's demands, the spectre of complete failure looms larger, because you've heard the whispered stories of those who cracked under similar pressures. The Academy itself maintains a complex relationship with failure. On one hand, failure is philosophically important. Socratic dialogues often end in aporia, demonstrating the limitations of current understanding as a spur to deeper inquiry. On the other hand, personal failure reflects poorly on the institution, suggesting either flawed selection of students or inadequate teaching methods. This tension creates a peculiar approach to struggling students. They're simultaneously pushed harder to overcome limitations and subtly encouraged to leave if those limitations prove persistent. The messaging is consistent with Platonic philosophy. Not everyone has the nature suitable for philosophical life, and recognizing one's limitations is itself a form of wisdom. Plato told me something when I was struggling with the theory of forms, shares a senior student who nearly left in his first year. He said, "There's no shame in not becoming a philosopher. There's only shame in pretending to be one when you are not." It was both the kindest and cruelest thing he could have said. For those who remain, the dropouts serve another function: reassurance that the path is genuinely difficult, that their struggles aren't personal inadequacy, but the normal response to extraordinary intellectual demands. If everyone succeeded easily, the value of success would diminish. The failures validate the achievements of those who persevere. Yet the system creates inevitable waste, talented minds who might have flourished under different approaches or at a different pace. The Academy's rigid progression from mathematics to dialectic to direct apprehension of the forms allows limited accommodation for different learning styles or intellectual strengths. A student brilliant in ethical reasoning but weak in geometry might be lost entirely. Perhaps the most profound failure mode isn't dropping out but persisting in a state of perpetual inadequacy. Some students technically complete the curriculum without ever achieving the philosophical transformation Plato intends. They memorize the positions, master the arguments, and perform the expected roles, but the inner illumination, the direct insight into the forms that represents true philosophical success, never comes. These students often become the most rigid, dogmatic adherents to Platonic orthodoxy, compensating for their lack of genuine understanding with aggressive defense of doctrinal details. Plato recognizes this pattern but can do little about it. The true philosophical vision can be prepared for but not directly taught. It must arise from within. As your first year progresses, you begin categorizing yourself and your fellow students according to these success and failure potentials. Who will emerge transformed? Who will break? Where do you stand on this spectrum of philosophical capability? The question haunts your late-night reflections. You've struggled with certain mathematical concepts but excelled in dialectical exchanges. You've felt moments of clarity that might qualify as glimpses of the forms, but also periods of crushing doubt about the entire Platonic project. which version of yourself will ultimately prevail. The Academy offers no guarantees, no comfortable assurances of success for sincere effort. Unlike modern educational institutions with their emphasis on student retention and support, Plato's school embraces a form of philosophical natural selection. Many are called, few are chosen, and the sorting process is deliberately demanding. Whether this approach produces the best philosophers or simply the most resilient ones remains an open question. Another of the many uncertainties you learn to live with as your academy education continues its transformative, sometimes destructive, work. As the sun sets on your first year at Plato's Academy, you stand at a crossroads both literal and metaphorical. The physical path leads back to the sleeping quarters where you'll spend another night on your simple pallet, dreaming in geometric patterns and dialectical exchanges. The metaphorical path stretches forward into an uncertain future. Will you continue this philosophical journey, or will you join the ranks of those who discovered the examined life was, in fact, not worth living? In this final hour, let's reflect on what you've endured and what it means for anyone foolish or brave enough to attempt a Platonic education. First, let's acknowledge the most basic reality. Most modern students simply wouldn't survive a day at Plato's Academy. The physical austerity alone would break many, the dawn to dusk schedule, the minimal diet, the lack of basic comforts like privacy or adequate bedding. Before philosophical rigor even enters the picture, the bodily discipline would send most running back to softer environments. But the physical challenge is pale compared to the intellectual and psychological gauntlet. The Academy doesn't just teach philosophy. It systematically dismantles your previous mental framework and attempts to rebuild it from first principles. This process is inherently traumatic. Your most basic assumptions about reality, value, knowledge, and self are questioned, challenged, and often discarded. Modern education generally aims to add information and skills to an existing personal foundation. Platonic education aims to replace the foundation itself. The difference is as profound as the distinction between redecorating a house and demolishing it to rebuild from the ground up. Both change the structure, but only one preserves continuity of residence. Would you genuinely choose this path if you understood what it entailed? Plato's answer, paradoxically, is that you can't truly choose until you've already undergone significant transformation. The unphilosophical mind, attached to appearances and guided by conventional values, lacks the capacity for informed choice about philosophical life. Only through philosophical education do you develop the discernment necessary to select philosophy authentically. This creates the fundamental catch-22 of Platonic education. You must submit to transformation before you can validly choose transformation. The Academy doesn't wait for your informed consent. It begins rewiring your mind from day one, confident that your true self, the rational soul beneath layers of conditioning and bodily distraction, will ultimately thank it for the liberation. By modern standards, this approach appears somewhere between presumptuous and cultish. Contemporary educational ethics emphasizes student autonomy, informed consent, and respect for diverse values. The Academy operates on precisely opposite principles. The teacher knows better than the student. Consent emerges through the process rather than preceding it, and philosophical truth trumps subjective values. Yet despite these fundamental tensions with modern sensibilities, aspects of Academy life remain deeply appealing, even from our distant vantage point. The total commitment to intellectual excellence, the integration of physical and mental discipline, the community unified by shared purpose rather than accident or convenience, the courage to question everything, including one's own most cherished beliefs. These qualities make the Academy simultaneously one of the most demanding and most inspiring educational models in human history. It represents both warning and ideal, a cautionary tale about intellectual arrogance, and a beacon of uncompromising commitment to truth-seeking. So what happened to the actual students who endured this philosophical boot camp? Their fates were as diverse as their capacities and circumstances. A small minority, like Aristotle, emerged as independent philosophical voices, sometimes building on Platonic foundations, sometimes rejecting them for alternative approaches. These were the unqualified successes, minds strong enough to absorb Platonic discipline without being permanently constrained by it. A larger group became loyal Platonists, carrying the tradition forward through teaching and writing. These ranged from creative interpreters, who developed new applications of Platonic principles, to rigid doctrinaires, who guarded orthodoxy against innovation. The Academe would continue for centuries after Plato's death, evolving through distinct phases of varying philosophical creativity. Many returned to conventional lives in Athens or other Greek cities, neither fully philosophical nor entirely conventional. These carried philosophical influences into politics, education, and civic life, creating ripple effects far beyond the Academe walls. A merchant who studied with Plato might not become a philosopher king, but his approach to commerce and citizenship would bear philosophical imprints. Some rejected philosophical life entirely, occasionally becoming vocal critics of what they viewed as abstract, impractical theorizing. The sophists, rhetoricians, and practical politicians who opposed Platonic education found allies among disillusioned former Academe students who had experienced the system's limitations firsthand, and a significant number simply disappeared from the historical record, their philosophical journeys unrecorded and their contributions unacknowledged. These anonymous students, some successful, some not, constitute the vast majority of those who passed through the olive grove seeking wisdom. Your own fate remains unwritten. The crossroads before you offers continuation or departure, deeper commitment or strategic retreat. Neither choice is objectively correct. Both contain potential for growth and loss. If you continue, the Academe promises further transformation, moving beyond the foundational curriculum toward more specialized philosophical work, perhaps eventually teaching younger students or applying Platonic principles in political contexts. The cost is increasing alienation from conventional life and values, a widening gap between your philosophical perspective and the worldview of family, former friends, and fellow citizens. If you depart, you carry fragments of philosophical training into a non-philosophical world. Some concepts and methods will serve you well, others will create friction with practical realities. You'll never fully return to pre-philosophical consciousness. The cave, once exited, looks different even if you re-enter it. But you might find a balanced integration that pure Academe life makes impossible. The final irony of Platonic education is that it ultimately circles back to the Socratic position. The only certain knowledge is the knowledge of your own limitations. After all the mathematical training, dialectical sparring, and metaphysical speculation, the greatest wisdom may be recognizing the boundaries of human understanding while continuing to push against them. Plato himself seems to acknowledge this tension. His dialogues rarely offer final, complete answers to the questions they raise. The theory of forms presents itself not as the end of philosophy, but as a necessary platform for its continuation. The Republic describes an ideal city, while recognizing it may never exist except in theoretical space. This philosophical humility, easily overlooked amid the Academe's intellectual ambition, may be the institution's most valuable legacy. Not the specific doctrines or methods which subsequent traditions would challenge and revise, but the fundamental commitment to pursuing wisdom while acknowledging its ultimate elusiveness. As night fully descends over the Academe grounds, you make your choice, to stay or go, to embrace the philosophical life completely or to seek some alternative path. Whatever you decide, you've been permanently marked by this encounter with Platonic education. Your mind works differently now. You see distinctions where others see uniformity, question what others accept, seek foundations where others require none. In that transformation, partial or complete, embraced or resisted, lies the Academe's enduring influence. It didn't just teach philosophy, it created philosophers. or at least philosophically influenced minds, who would carry its questions, if not its answers, into the broader world. And those questions, more than any specific doctrine, represent Plato's greatest contribution. Long after the physical Academy was destroyed, long after specific Platonic theories were challenged or abandoned, the fundamental questions remained. What is real? What can we know? How should we live? What constitutes justice, beauty, and goodness? The genius of Plato's Academy was not providing final answers to these questions, but creating a community and methodology dedicated to exploring them with uncompromising rigor. In that commitment to philosophical inquiry, demanding, transformative, and perpetually unfinished, lies both its historical significance and its continued relevance to anyone who seeks wisdom rather than mere knowledge. You might not survive a day at Plato's Academy. Few would. But the questions it raised have survived millennia and continue to challenge us toward deeper understanding, whether we're prepared for that challenge or not.